Even with the largest defense budget in the world, the U.S. government is not immune to supply chain challenges.
Next year's national security budget will likely be nearly $1.5 trillion, and Congress wants to add tens of billions of dollars to that number, despite the fact that the Department of Defense has shown time and again that it's not managing its finances effectively.
I don't think that this necessarily means we're going to blow the top off of the defense budget. I think it's probably more about developing an ability to scale and ramp production when and where it's needed.
Despite over $1 billion set aside for contracts to replace items sent to Ukraine, the U.S. still faces an uphill battle to build these replacement weapons. A bipartisan group of senators have introduced the Securing American Arms Act to find a way to specifically backfill weapons sent to Ukraine through the award of non-competitive contracts. Also, according to the Department of Defense, $352 million has been set aside to replace the Javelins given to Kyiv, $624 million to replace Stinger surface-to-air missiles, and $33 million for HIMARS under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. But supply chain issues have been a problem for every industry the last several years, including for the defense industry, which could slow down this process. In 2020 alone, the aerospace industry lost around 55,700 jobs in small and medium-sized businesses due to supply chain issues.
Critical components, critical suppliers, critical materials or minerals. Having them dependent upon an international country, think about like a China, what's going on with the war in Ukraine, with Russia. I mean, it's just not what we want to do from a standpoint of risk to our own critical defense supply chain.
Figuring out what the issues are with your supply chain as they exist is one matter, but then saying, I want to increase production by 50%, not only to supply myself, but then to supply two countries, it poses a whole other set of problems.
But look, we're dealing with a country in China that's got 1.4 billion people. We need allies and partners. We have a real opportunity for scale, and we can solve some of these problems. There's plenty of money to go around, and we want them to have skin in the game.
Can the U.S. retool the defense industry to meet new challenges? The U.S. has donated billions of dollars worth of military aid to Ukraine. This includes everything from bullets to high-tech anti-ship missiles. Most of this equipment came from the existing Department of Defense arsenal. Keeping track of everything is a huge task. One potential problem is the lack of permanent inspectors general.
It is truly stunning that the state and defense departments are handling billions of dollars in Ukraine assistance without permanent inspectors general in place to ensure that they're spent as effectively as possible in conducting this proper oversight.
Some weapons were nearing the end of their lifespan. Javelins and Stinger missile systems are good for about 10 years before they need to be checked and recertified. This all eats into the U.S. military's current supply of weapons and equipment, which could hurt its ability to respond in an extended conflict. The Pentagon has put together a so-called Tiger Team to find ways to speed up U.S. arms sales to allies, in part to help refill stockpiles depleted from sending arms to Ukraine.
That's fine. That's a good thing, but it's the wrong order of magnitude, right? Before Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States was in massive, military buildup. The Navy itself, aircraft production, and of course was building on what was then called the Detroit deterrent. Basically, the fact that we had the largest industrial production by far in the world. That's not the case anymore. So we're a long way from where we need to be.
It's not just about keeping a stockpile of the things themselves sitting around in a warehouse somewhere, but you also need stockpiles of all the spare parts in case anything goes wrong. Now, we've been talking about munitions specifically, but that's even more imperative if you talk about vehicles. So if it's aircraft or ships or tanks or any kind of ground vehicle, those things not just need the item itself, but all of the items that make that thing work.
Industry capacity plays an important role in the ability of the United States to produce weapons, a capacity that could be hindered in the event of a major war.
We can talk about weapon systems, we can talk about electronics, I think you can talk about propulsion systems, right? As core competencies, like if we think about America, the defense of the free world, we really want to have ownership of those capabilities.
When a production line shuts down, such as with the F-22 stealth fighter, that talent and expertise moves on to different careers, and the valuable hard-earned experience is shifted to either a different defense industry project, such as the F-35, or talent moves out of the industry altogether. Shipbuilding is another field where the ebbs and flows of skilled labor employment depend on orders that can change from year to year.
I mean, the practical skills that were that are necessary for a healthy industrial base. I mean, shipbuilding, but also, I mean, getting into more of the specifics like welding and pipe fitting and these things that seem kind of mundane to somebody who's not familiar with it. But these are kind of the areas that are critical for industrial production.
Despite these challenges, the U.S. has some of the most well-funded defense companies in the world. That raises the question of whether further investment is the right proposition for the U.S. taxpayer.
My response to those citing China and even Russia as reasons to increase military spending is more is not always better, and how you spend money is just as important as the money itself. The United States is currently spending more than the next 9 countries combined on national security. I think most folks have heard that statistic before. And of course, those 9 countries include both Russia and China.
Skilled worker gaps are a concern among those in the defense industry.
If you think about electric boat, they've publicly stated they're 200,000 man-hours short per year. I mean, think about that, 200,000 man-hours short per year to make submarines. Submarines are the first line of deterrence for the U.S. Navy, basically for the United States, right? For anything that might happen with China, it's the first action is going to be with submarines. If we can't even get the labor to build those on time, on schedule, right? We've got serious issues.
Even before the war in Ukraine, arms deals were being worked out by U.S. defense contractors. Since the Russian invasion, demand has only increased. China's hardline stance towards Taiwan only heightened the concerns that international relations are heading for turbulence. New orders of weapons like the Javelin, an anti-tank missile system that has proved its value in Ukraine, are pushing the limits of what production lines can produce in the coming years. And with success on the battlefield comes more orders from customers. Brazil recently ordered 74 million in Javelin missile systems. Taiwan is increasing its request for advanced U.S. weapons as part of a $1.1 billion arms sale. Meanwhile, the U.S. needs to replace the approximately 1/3 of its Javelin stocks given to Ukraine.
If you want to, for example, ramp production of HIMARS, which has been used to such great effect in Ukraine, you're going to be robbing from your ability to produce the SM-6, air-to-air munition, for example, perhaps, or the Tomahawk land attack cruise missile, perhaps, because they might share some subcomponents. Whether they be chips or little, motors and whatnot.
The U.S. is also looking at increasing domestic orders to increase production line output, which could also help replenish weapon stocks that were donated to Ukraine. With so many weapons going to so many countries, concerns about end use abound.
There are obviously transparency and security concerns to proliferating weapons around the globe. Of course, the United States is the biggest arms proliferator in the world. And the Pentagon, on top of its financial mismanagement issues, isn't particularly good at keeping track of those weapons, much less how they're used on the ground.
The push and pull of where the U.S. defense budget goes continues.
This is really important. If we want to be able to get something, as you mentioned, from Amazon or anywhere else that we want to go shopping, want to live the lives that we have to have this layer of support in the defense industry to be able to guarantee that.
Congress is arbitrarily increasing the defense budget and all of the defense-related spending in other federal agencies. It is not making the country safer. It is actually hurting our national security, and it is at the expense of taxpayers.
With China producing more military weapons than ever, the U.S. could be sleepwalking into a disaster.
We can't rely on China to build components for our weapons, which is to some extent potentially what we have done, whether knowingly or not.
That base of suppliers, that web, that supply web that feeds things like chips and explosives into places like the large prime contractors, your Lockheed Martins, your Raytheons, et cetera, who go out and build these munitions. All of those are interconnected with each other, and all of those are supplying multiple weapon system programs.
One of the critical things with the defense industry in particular is volumes are low, right? If the U.S. builds 8 to 10 warships a year, that's a lot, right? There isn't anyone that's going to be able to say, oh, we're going to have to just-in-time, engines or just-in-time critical components. There's not enough volume there to do that. You actually have to have that source. You have to have that material ahead of time. You can't wait